Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum to all. Though the text picked for this second session of the Shakespeare Hour invites much serious debate and contemplation, let me begin on a lighter note with a personal anecdote. As a lover of literature, I have long known that words have wings, and also that Shakespeare can appear in the most unexpected places. So picture this. A couple of years ago, I was in Turkey. At the foot of the Ankara castle, there's a network of meandering narrow lanes, and tucked in one of them is a favorite shop of mine. An old man sells hand-knitted baby socks, dresses, and stuffed toys, all made by his wife. So as I was picking through what to buy for my imaginary grandchildren, I have quite a collection of their merchandise, not of grandchildren. An elderly couple stopped by and started looking at things for their presumably real grandkids. We exchanged smiles and greetings, and their smiles got wider when they learned I'm from Pakistan. This phenomenon only occurs in Turkey, by the way. Turned out the husband was a retired English teacher from Istanbul. When I told them I taught Shakespeare, he said to me, "Olmak ya da olmamak." Seeing my quizzical look, he added, "Hamlet, to be or not to be." So that's how I encountered Hamlet yet again in Turkey. As words intrigued me, I went home and looked up the phrase, and I found out it's quite a common saying in Turkey. One more reason to love my favorite place. Well, let's begin our second session then. Hamlet's Soliloquy in the Nunnery. As in the previous Shakespeare Hour, I'll read out the passage in my interpretation of it, and then we'll open the discussion for your views, ideas, and your personal experiences with reference to the context. Shumaila Amjad is facilitating again in keeping the flow of conversation smooth for all of us. Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say, we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks the flesh is heir to. To die, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, that's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. To be or not to be revolves around complex ideas of life and death, and of course, that perennial greatest mystery of all, the afterlife. In the last year, the unexpected, unforgettable COVID year, the specters of illness, not only the physical kind, and of death, have been looming large over our lives, casting grim shadows across the world, uniting us in anxiety and in misery, and paradoxically uniting us in loneliness. We have become, as never before, acutely aware of the fragility of life as we know it. And for many of us, the direction and the very compass of our life may have changed completely. Whether we've endured the grief of losing a loved one, or experienced the fear of losing loved ones, and even the anxiety of losing ourselves, it has certainly been a year where all of us have thought about, in life, the constant presence of death. So once again, Shakespeare does his magic trick of becoming relevant ages away from his time. In the lines from the assassination scene in Julius Caesar, when the conspirators gloat over their heroic deed, they boast, How many ages hence shall this our lofty scene be acted o'er, in states unborn and accents yet unknown? I often joke to my literature students that Shakespeare could never have imagined that in the unborn of country of Pakistan, students would be studying him, preparing to take exams on Julius Caesar. So Hamlet's words also become relevant in 2021 as we see new heroes emerge as on medical frontiers and new villains appear, those who throw caution to the winds by not following rules, thus endangering their own lives and those of others. Ethical questions about who needs to be saved first, which generation needs or wants to be on the priority list for vaccination, and innumerable such debates about life and death have entered our lives, our homes, our minds. To be or not to be, that is the question. Stoicism versus Epicureanism. Whether to bow down respectfully before destiny or to take control of and become masters of our destiny. Whether it is nobler to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, to resign to our fate, or to live on in misery. Hamlet is contemplating suicide, of course, or to heroically make the decision to end our life, taking arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. I was recently listening to a news clip where a professor from Oxford was saying that preferably, instead of the elderly, the younger generation should be vaccinated first because they are the future of human civilization. Point to ponder, as it set me thinking and agreeing with his opinion. To see where the greater loss lies needs a special kind of altruistic vision. And heroes come in many kinds of costumes. The medical scrubs and hazmat suits have been the season's favorite this last year. I think the best gift this past year has given us is time to sit back, take a breather, and meditate about the deeper meaning of life and of what actually holds value in our lives and the passing nature of the world as we perceive it. Fear, too, can have its advantages. Ghazali, the great Sufi philosopher, says, when we fear a man, we run away from him, and when we fear God, we run towards him. So, in this fearful time, many of us have experienced, in a measure great or small, some form of spiritual awakening and the discovery that we are more than the sum of our desires. So, T.S. Eliot called Hamlet the Mona Lisa of literature, which is an apt description, because like Da Vinci's masterpiece, Shakespeare's Hamlet also opens up mystery upon mystery, question about question, and every time we go back to it, the answers change. As happens in revisiting any great work of art, because in the interim, we have grown and we have changed. Yet the work retains its magical hold on us. Hamlet was written at a period in Shakespeare's life when he himself was going through very intense personal grief. The death of his 11-year-old son, Hamlet, after whom the play is presumably named. The pathos in this particular passage is very possibly an extension of an outpouring of Shakespeare's own grief. In Maggie O'Farrell's recent book, Hamlet, which is a fictional take on Shakespeare's life and recounts the tragedy, a very poignant moment is when Shakespeare comes home to Stratford from London and learns about the death of his son. His daughter Judith describes the sound he makes at this discovery as being like that of an animal straining under a great weight. I can so relate to this line, having lost a son years ago. My heart still makes that sound, unheard by others, even years later. So it's very natural that Shakespeare's grief spilled over in this amazingly emotional soliloquy in Hamlet, having been hit by the sharpest sling and arrow of fortune, even so much so as the contemplation of taking your own life, because in such degree of distress, utter distress, all that seems to stretch ahead is darkness. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. The two opposite points of view of Stoics and Epicures were debated as hotly in Shakespeare's time as they are in ours, and will be in the foreseeable future. Is it noble to accept the blows of fate with a brave face and a courageous heart? And in that action, please the divine in whatever form we conceive it? Or does honor lie in carpe diem, seizing the day, and molding fortune to our wishes, even to the very end? As Cassius declares in Julius Caesar again, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. Is it morally correct to prolong suffering, or is ending it the ethical thing to do? The pandemic has definitely opened up this question yet again. As we read the lines, we must also remember that Hamlet's tragedy is doublefold. His loss has two dimensions: the loss of a life, his father's, and the loss of faith and trust, his mother's betrayal. Her haste in marrying his uncle Claudius has hit him hard too. And Hamlet grieves as only the young can grieve, with abandon and madness. The why me question against outrageous fortune is always much louder in youth. As we grow older, we grow thicker skins, less affected by death, and even lesser affected by breaking of trust. For Shakespeare to capture that youthful anguish and self-consuming grief in the person of Hamlet is a masterpiece of empathy. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say, we end the heartache. At some point in life, when struck with abject grief, each one of us has wished for death, for an end to the heartache, to go into an abyss of endless sleep. There are millions more wished and attempted suicides, which are actually very often an act of calling for attention, than there are actually committed suicides. So, what holds us back from taking that leap? Dust thou art, and to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. The question then is, what lies beyond? The readiness for the journey of the soul into the unknown, that huge leap of faith most of us are afraid to take. Fear holds us back from crossing the frontier between the known and the great unknown. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, that's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely? The pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the worthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? But that the dread of something after life, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickly raw with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment with disregard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. Yes, fear. Fear of that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will. So we keep on slogging, weather beaten and weary, preferring the blows that are seen rather than venturing forth to those waiting unseen, unfathomed. Conscience does make cowards of us all. For not one of us is without sin, without blemish. And even though we keep giving in to temptation, we also live in fear of retribution for our capitulation. Hamlet opens up so many windows into understanding angst and anxiety in his madness. And what is madness? What is normal and what is abnormal? Isn't that also open to debate? There's more awareness now about all of us being differently abled, of all of us thinking in different patterns and pathways. So the mood swings, the anger, the desire for revenge, the self-pity, indeed the self-centeredness of Hamlet, everyone else, even Ophelia, becomes secondary to his own self. And all these traits are so recognizable, and that's the genius of Shakespeare. We have lived in our minds as Hamlet in our younger selves, gone through pain in the extreme way he feels it. And in our older selves, we can observe, understand, and empathize with his tormented soul. Loss and separation, especially in the last year, has become a constant companion for us. We have either lost loved ones or are distant from loved ones. We are either lost loved ones or we are distanced from our loved ones. And in that, we have lost parts of ourselves. That reminds me of how in French, the phrase "tu me manques," the English translation of which would be "I miss you," actually has a much deeper meaning, more profound and more eloquent, I find. It says, "You are missing from me." So in separation from those we love, in losing a loved one to death, a piece of us goes missing forever. And that loss, of course, is impossible to mend. But perhaps at journey's end, there is reunion. And in meeting those we are distanced from, now, hopefully, once the pandemic is over, we will start the healing. Often, when anxiety takes over, and it is often, I remember these lines from another classic, the Desiderata, and they help to keep me strong. And I quote, "Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Whether it is clear to you or not, the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive Him to be. With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. And gratitude is an attitude. Stay safe, stay strong, stay blessed, everyone. Thank you. And we'll open now for your comments, your personal experiences, if you'd like to share what grief has meant to you, how grief may have changed you, and what comfort you may have found in this year of sorrow uh, that has taken over our lives. And like Hamlet, we've been fighting the slings and arrows of fortune. So if anyone has a question or would like to share an experience, most welcome. Yes, Alpha says a young man may live on to do absolutely nothing, while an older person may live on to meaningfully contribute. As healthcare professionals, we cannot refuse treatment to anyone, but of course, that's left, the decision is left upon the recipient of the treatment. Yes, Alpha, exactly what I'm saying is that um, so much open to debate, right? And the decision, of course, lies with each one of us, how we would like to go forward. And it's a debate that's open for all times to come, I suppose, now, because I don't think that we are going to get out of this period very soon. Humaira says, fear of the unknown is frightening indeed. Yes, Humaira, I think that's what holds us back and keeps us clinging to life, isn't it? The fear of the unknown. It's a very frightening thing. Thank you. Yes, Hamlet has been connecting me to many of my old friends this year, and I've been thinking about a lot of people, about my own mother, who I lost some years ago. I've been thinking about it, and you know, she was a very, very brave woman, but the one thing she was afraid of was death, because again, I suppose that leap into the unknown. Anyone else would like to share their experience with sorrow? Yes, the Desiderata is a real classic, Humi Qureshi. It's one of the most inspiring things I've read. I read it when I was in school, and I really loved the whole piece is so inspiring. You can just go on reading it again and again. Sajid, yes, you're saying the soliloquy was about over-analysis, and yes, over-analysis is something that, being alone, many of us have been doing over-analysis over and over again. Yes, when we are left to ourselves, and when we feel that everyone else has abandoned us, as Hamlet does feel, right? That he's fighting against everyone alone, and he's fighting fate alone, and he has a duty to his father to fulfill, and he does not know how to go forward with it, right? So yes, over analysis, and over analysis, I think, also is a part of youth, right? Because we read so much more meaning into everything when we are younger. When we are older, the choices become maybe clearer, or we narrow them down, right? But when we are younger, it's, yes, it is the curse of the smart person. Yes, you're right, Sajid. Over analysis is Arfa says it takes more courage to live and battle the fatigue of making decisions and then consequently living with those decisions. Yes, Arfa, I totally agree. It takes courage to live. But I also feel that um, it takes a lot of courage to end your life also, right? That great leap. I mean, as I said, there are so many more attempted suicides than actual suicides. So that cut, that severing the bond, right? I always feel it takes unimaginable courage or despair. It can be both, right? Yes, yes. Batul says the tragedy of Hamlet is relatable, and Al-Kindi, the Persian philosopher, writes about Stoicism. Hamlet reminds me of that pain and how it made him stronger, yet he was vulnerable. I find that pain is actually very good for your character, isn't it? Pain is very good for your character because on the one hand, paradoxically, it makes you stronger. But on the other hand, if you obviously, pain makes us more sensitive people. And if you're a sensitive person, that pain will make you more empathetic to others' emotions and other people's feelings, right? So sorrow is a very, it's like needing the door, right? It needs us and it makes us much softer and it makes us more absorbing of other people's pain. So sorrow is in its own way, as all philosophers say, sorrow is actually a blessing, right? Because without sorrow, we'd rather take things for granted. Isn't that true? If there were no sorrow, right? So when I pray for my children, I tell them also that you can never say, let my life not have any problems, right? Because what would life be without problems? We would become very selfish people who would take everything for granted. The thing to pray for is that we have the strength to deal with the problems that we are given, right? I'd call it blessed with maybe. So, problems and sorrow, it's actually a very strengthening experience. Yes, it is very pithy. It is very, and I love the youthfulness of Hamlet, because I can so actually also see my own young self in Hamlet. You feel everything so intensely when you're young. And every time I go back to Hamlet, it's like, going back to those times when I felt so intensely about things. Homie, I'm so sorry. Yes, the grief of losing a mother, the grief of losing a child, I've experienced both. And they are equally harder, right? When mothers go away or fathers, the thing that you miss most about parents, though, I've lost, my mother in law also in the past couple of years, and my mother some years ago. What happens is uh, you lose people who have been praying for you and who wish you well. So that loss, of people in the generation before us, and I'm at an age now where we are seeing that quite constantly, right? We are losing the people who are in the generation before us. And every time I just feel that the loss of somebody who wishes you well and prays for you, that loss is quite shattering, because you realize that, the people you turned to, they're not there anymore. But maybe in another dimension, maybe they do hear us, and maybe they do wish us well in that other realm also. Yes, all young people are crazy, isn't it, Umera? All young people are crazy. Yes, it's so nice to be young and crazy, because you never feel that way again. As you grow older, you, as I said, get the thicker skin, and you lose so much empathy also. And you realize, yes, from empathy stems kindness and unconditional acceptance. Very right, Arfa. Empathy, you're standing in another's shoes. Marzieh says, sorrow is such sweet pain. Yes, parting is sweet sorrow, Shakespeare says in Romeo and Juliet, isn't it? Parting is such sweet sorrow that I will wish you goodbye till the morrow, or something like that. Parting is a sorrow, but it is, the threshold is different for sorrow, Narjis Ali says. Yes, every one of us experiences uh, sorrow in a different degree, right? There are many of us who do not feel the intensity, or when, suffering makes you practical also. So if you have like a loved one on a respirator or something, you take the practical view, and sometimes then you say, maybe it's better, right, to be or not to be. That is the question. What is the more ethical thing to do? Right? What would be a better way? Yes, Shumaila says, I find Camus introduced a great deal about life and the illusion of life, right? Everything is so fleeting. And suicide is just one's active choice in choosing not to live in it. But it can also be that illusions can be created and crafted by your own choice. Knowing that life itself is an illusion is an opportunity of creating your own life, isn't it? Yes, I agree with that. That, I mean, life is an illusion, right? Whatever we know is constantly changing. We ourselves are changing constantly, isn't it? We are not the same people that we were yesterday, or we are not the same people that we were some years ago, right? So then, given the ongoing pandemic, I think it's high time we become used to the concept of problems and tragedies, and train our minds to make our hearts more accepting of disappointment as we steer our lens towards gratitude and finding the silver lining in what seems to be a dark pitch. Yes, Arpa. Uh, that's what I was focusing on, that, the grief and sorrow of the past year, it's kind of realigned our whole life, isn't it? It has realigned our life and made us think about what really uh, holds value in our lives, right? All of us have been forced to think about that. And for some of us, maybe many of us, uh, the priorities of life may have changed completely, right? So, yes, sorrow and grief does that to you. And tragedies, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So, all of us hopefully are emerging stronger from this past year or the past time. Oh, yes, but losing a mother is like a permanent puncture in your soul. Every day becomes more difficult and it drags because you miss your rock, your greatest cheerleader, your ma. Yes, that is so true. That is so true. You even miss the scoldings, don't you, Patu? I miss the scoldings of my mother. I was never a model child, and I was quite a disappointment to her because my head was always in my books and no. But even that I miss now because I feel that maybe if she came back just to scold me once more, even that would be welcome. Yes. Being empathetic takes its tolls. Any thoughts on how to approach and find the only good of this? Homi, being empathetic necessarily puts a burden of pain on you. You know, so either you have to decide not to be empathetic and practical, and I have yet to learn that because that is the bane of my life. My children tell me I'm a hypocrite, but I cannot help. I always put myself in the other person's shoes, and I'm always thinking how things are from their perspective. And that makes it makes it very difficult for me to choose who's right and who's wrong, because the perspective completely changes when you put yourself in another's shoes, right? So being empathetic is a curse in its own way. Thank you, Humaira. Uh, I don't know if I'm intelligent, but Ali Shahid says Hamlet is not the same towards the end of the play and has come to terms with reality, not of it. We defy augury that a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Yes, definitely, Ali. The readiness is all, since no man of what he leaves knows what is to leave betimes. Let be. I agree. I agree with you. Hamlet changes. We all change. Hamlet. So you see again the sorrow. It has made him grow, right? So he's not the same person that we see right at the beginning. We see, happy-go-lucky Hamlet changed into seeing the ghost of his father, being through the death of his father, right? Everyone is commenting on how he has changed and trying Claudius and his mother trying to divert him back to what he was, right? But we can never become the same people that we were before a sorrow strikes us. And after we have endured that sorrow, we cannot be the same people again. We change. Yes, these stories are our stories, isn't it? We see these stories, Narjis Ali, we see these stories all around us all the time, right? You have friends who are going through grief, who have gone through grief. Uh, we have our own selves. We see the grief of our children, and sometimes we want to help them, but we have to stand by and let life happen to them. So yes, sorrow does different things to different people. And the most powerful masterpieces of literature, they show us mirror images of ourselves. And that's the wonderful thing about them. Thank you, Humi Qureshi. Your comments are making me think also, and they're opening new windows for me also. So this Shakespeare Hour is very educative and informative for me also, because when I see how people are thinking, especially young people, right? I can consider myself old now. So when I see young people sharing and, uh, you know, talking about their experiences, It educates me a lot also, because each generation also, not only person to person, but each generation also thinks very differently about things, right? Because they are, as I said, differently abled. They are of different times. Every generation is of a different time. So we have been crafted and sculpted by a different time than our children. And compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is a very real thing, isn't it? When you're taking care of uh, people who need the care, right? And you feel the guilt of not feeling compassion sometimes, right, Arfa? That's the thing that happens to I would say most of us, right? Especially those who are taking care of a loved one who needs help all the time. And compassion has its limits also, right? So it's very human to feel compassion fatigue. And for health carers, I feel for them so much. I'm sure they are the ones who go through most go through compassion fatigue, and yet they carry on. That is such a beautiful thing about health workers, I always feel, because the thick skin that I was talking about, yes, we all grow that, but they still carry on. And compassion fatigue, I think, I don't know, I've experienced it. As I said, my mother was ill for many years before she crossed the frontier. And yes, everyone feels compassion fatigue, and we feel guilty about it also. It's very natural, right? So I would say, I've been taking these meditation classes. One thing that it has taught me is that let the thoughts flow in and out. We're all human beings, and we all go through these stages, and we all are affected by such thoughts, right? That sometimes we do feel that my patience has run out or my compassion has run out. But uh, we should learn to recognize that it's just a passing feeling that we have, and it does not make us sinners in any way. I mean, we are human, right? We are human. Yes, I have to come more often, but I hope that everyone does not get compassion fatigue regarding me, Humaira. One thing I would like to say though, this morning I got a message about somebody very special, and I'd like to take a moment to uh, talk to her, if you all permit. Miss King. Miss King, if you are listening, a debt of gratitude long overdue to you. For somebody who was at age 12 a non-conformist, and as I said, a disappointment to my mother, uh, life at school and at home was very drab and dreary till you opened the door to a magical realm, and it still is the greatest, most wonderful escape for me. So, Miss Amy King, if you are listening, you brought joy to so many of our lives. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's an honor and privilege if you are listening to this. Yes, to Miss King, the evergreen Miss King. She brought beauty into our lives, and that is such a wonderful gift. Reading is such a wonderful gift. If we can just introduce it to our children, to learn to live in the books that we read. It's such a beautiful thing. And the last year, I've not been able to travel, which I love to do. And I've just always, I'm thinking that if there were no books in my life, my God, how miserable I would be. Right? So it's such a wonderful thing to have a love of reading. We need to inculcate that in our children. Yes, Miss Lava, a teacher affects eternity, and uh, a teacher affects all times to come, right? Uh, the most beautiful moments in my life are when I hear from my one of my children and they relate an experience and then relate it to something in Shakespeare that I must have taught them long, long ago. I don't remember it, but it makes me so blessed and happy and grateful that they think about it. Mrs. Sirajuddin, yes. Mrs. Sirajuddin in our college, yes, she taught us King Lear. And, the King Lear is one of my favorites. And that fury, that controllable fury of Lear in the storm scene, uh, sometimes I can relate to that. It's wonderful. Yes, Batul Ahmed, big shout out to all the teachers. They've had such a difficult year, and I'm not actively teaching just now, but the whole year I've been looking at how teachers have adapted and they've been going on and they have refused to give up, and they've been, at it. They've been changing their way of teaching. They've been learning new things, and they've had to implement it immediately. And they're such heroes. I feel teachers are such heroes. Arfa says compassion fatigue is more difficult after losing a loved one. After I lost my maternal grandmother, I realized how fragile my own compassion had become. I find myself now turning into a protective shield of sorts, distancing myself from the unfortunate prospect of another loss. It makes one feel guilty, but the fear of being on the verge of another loss, another grief, leaves one exhausted already. Yes, well, Arfa, so relatable. What you're saying is so true, right? Especially after long drawn out illnesses of loved ones, right? Uh, that compassion deficiency really sets in and makes us feel guilty and makes us feel so terrible, right? So it's always something to be wished that the end for everyone, for each one of us, is swift, maybe brutal, but it has to be swift, right? That's what I pray for myself. Nobody would want to, again, Arfa, you're talking about compassion deficit, and you're talking about it from the point of view of the carer, right? But put yourself in the shoes of the person who's being cared for and imagine, like my mother was a very, very independent soul, and seeing her at the end, I could see how it was tearing her apart, that her children had to uh, take care of her in that way, for every small need. So think about how it feels for the person who's being cared for also. Their grief also cannot be, their griefs, cannot be forgotten. Yes, Omi, of course. I love sharing my thoughts. And thank you to T2F for providing this platform because it's so wonderful to connect to people and see. Teachers had to revisit, Batul says, all methodologies of the new virtual classroom teaching. Of course, Batul, heroes, real heroes, I tell you, teachers not giving up. Alpha is my student, and she says, have it more often. Lovely walk down memory lane. I feel like I'm back in those mesmerizing literature classes that I used to look forward to. The only class many of us lived for. Alpha. I had my problems at home also, and I can tell you, uh, I looked forward to those literature classes as much as you all looked forward to listening to me, because listening to you and forgetting everything once I entered that door and looking at your, your receptive faces, right? It was so wonderful to have that class of 30, 32 children all waiting for the next passage in Shakespeare, and all, as you, when you teach literature, you look at your students and you can see in their eyes, and Shehzadi Aga has often shared this thought with me, that you look into their eyes and you can see the connection, right? And you can see how a line sparks off uh, a flow of thought in them, because everyone is relating. It's so exciting because everyone is listening to the same line, but everyone, their mind is going off at a different tangent. Everyone is thinking of a memory that is, of course, different from all others. And that's why the literature class has been such a wonderful experience for me, because listening to the children's take on the lines, that was the most wonderful thing, because I learned so much every time I came into the class and walked out of it. I carried so much more home with me to think about and ponder, and it was so educative for me also. Arfa says, I've seen how taxing it is on the person being cared for, and that's really gotten me thinking about how I would like to go swift and quick. Yes, Arfa, if only we could choose to be or not to be, isn't it? Every one of us would take the swift path, right? So, yes, it's been wonderful talking to you all, and if anyone would like to share a personal experience with this question of to be or not to be, to capitulate to the slings and arrows of fortune, or to end uh, the sorrow. What are your thoughts about that? Has anyone experienced? Coming back to Hamlet, how would I close? I would close by, if I came back to Hamlet, I would close by again saying, today I was thinking in the morning, if I would close by saying, look at and listen to the people around you, because so much anguish goes by unnoticed, especially younger people. If you're parents and have uh, young people in the house, right? Everyone now is on their phones or on their computer screens, and I feel that in many ways the connection between parents and children, the connection between people living in the same house, right? That connection has become quite weak. So, what would I close with? I would say, look around you, look at the people around you, and uh, try and fathom what's going on in their minds, especially those who seem upset, or their behavior is different from what you would say. I wouldn't call it normal, but what is usual, right? So to yes, for yourself. For yourself just to be. The sorrows will melt away if you just be still. Yes, that is a very important thing. But it is for yourself, right? Uh, for yourself, for our own selves, I would say be still is the best. As I said, the desiderata, right? The universe is unfolding as it should, whether it's clear to you or not. So being still is a great skill if you can master it, right? But also, I would say be aware, right? Calmness or stillness is a very great skill to acquire, right? Because we so often fall into that fallacy that we can control what's going on around us, right, or our lives. Or, but being still requires great strength, and calmness is a skill that we must learn and acquire. But also, since I'm a literature teacher and my audience is, or my, what would you say, my intended audience or preferred audience is young people, then to older people or people living in parents, I would say be aware. Be aware of what your children are going through, right? Look for signs because I've been reading so much about this, desire to commit suicide, right? And so much of it can be alleviated, right? Anxiety can be alleviated by talking. Anxiety can be alleviated by bringing the problem to the fore. And definitely, anxiety can be alleviated by seeking help. That is the most important thing, to recognize if somebody needs help, right? And to take the steps to get that help to that person, right? So Hamlet is drifting in an ocean rudderless, right? But as families, we have that responsibility to look around us and see and gauge if every one of us is okay. That's how the home is going to function, right? So if you see somebody who is going through a difficult period, uh, first of all, the communication has to be open, and then uh, trying and alleviating the problem and seeking help. Uh, that those are very important things to remember at this time, especially, right? Because all of us are confined and we all think we're alone, right? So I would say that's what I took from Hamlet this time. It really connected me to the time that we are living in, and it yes, that's why I chose this speech, because Humera, uh, it just made everything so relevant. You know, Hamlet's speech made everything so relevant, and it brought home the realities of life as we are facing it today. Right? So hopefully we meet in better times. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. If anyone would like to say anything to close the session, most welcome. Thank you, Homi. Take care. Yes, reaching out is the best way forward, Shaziaga says. It's so true. We must keep reaching out. No man is an island. Zaid Aslam, I wish I was teaching you and you were back in grade 8, but life goes on and we grow up, right? That's one of the tragedies of life. I wish I was in grade 8 and Miss King was teaching me. And I'm sure Miss King would have new insights to give me. The rest is silence. Yes, I love. Silence is beautiful in many ways. Thank you. Thank you all. Your talk brought a lot of solace to me, your talk. Yes. Thank you, Mom. Right, so thank you everyone, and inshallah we'll meet again the next Shakespeare session in a few weeks' time. And if anyone has any ideas of what they'd like, which passage they'd like to discuss or they'd like me to talk about, we all would love that. So your suggestions and your comments are always welcome. And thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Khuda Hafiz.